Hello and welcome to another podcast from Fantasy Football Scout. Today I'm joined by Pranil, aka Lateriser, who you may know him as. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing good, Andy. How about you? Enjoying the break?
Yeah, if you can call it a break. I don't know if I would call it a break right now. It's so busy, but I know what you mean. Like it's kind of nice this period of like hope. That it's going to be the season, which all kind of comes downhill after game week one. But yeah, I'm not doing too bad. But in this one, we're doing a bit different. There's not like a draft or anything like that. I should say from the top, right? Late Riser, 3 top 200 finishes, which is just ridiculous. So the aim is to kind of get some insight into how that happens, whether we call it tips, habits. I'll let you explain a bit about that in a minute. But we're going to go through kind of 10, not rules, which we'll explain later on, but kind of 10 things to think about, I'd say. So do you want to kind of explain how you see these 10 things we're going to talk about?
So it's basically what I call good habits that have done well for me in the past. I feel like some managers can pick up from this because I don't believe in having FPL rules. So I'll just call them good habits, good FPL habits, or good FPL tips.
Yeah, cool. So we're basically going to go through them one by one. Most of you will be happy to hear. Late Rise is going to do most of the talking, and I'm going to sit back a bit for this one, but I will add some input as and when, as we're going through each of these. So I guess we'll just kick on with the first one. I think so. I've literally got all 10 listed separately, so we'll go through one by one. So the first one that you brought to me was arm yourself with info. So do you want to? It's obviously everyone wants information, but how do you go about doing that?
So especially during game week one, and this has to do with I see a lot of managers spending a lot of time on the actual FPL website tinkering and working out like 100 permutations and combinations of the team. I actually don't tinker. I've tinkered once since the game launched, and I've just sort of think about the team in my head. But before you sit down to tinker or before you make your team, what I think will be useful is if you're reading up as much as possible on all the teams. Like I'm pretty obsessive compulsive that way, where I have to read all the articles on Fantasy Football Scout. So read as much as you can. Go to websites like StatsBomb, go to watch videos that are on T4, watch highlights, spend some time in the members area. And what happens is when you're doing this, when you're arming yourself with as much information as possible, what you're doing is kind of strengthening your instinct, your subconscious, and those decisions that you're thinking about, where instead of having 100 permutations and combinations, what actually happens is you'll tend to be more decisive. You'll actually know in your head what player you prefer over what player, which players are your priority, what do you really really want in your team, and you'll end up being more decisive and less confused with your team.
Yeah, I actually think I've probably done this without thinking about it. For some players, I have tinkered way more than you. I'll tell you that now. But for example, Werner, right? He was someone I read about before I even knew what his FPL price was going to be, and I kind of decided that I thought he was going to be a great option this year. This was before fixtures came out, and then now he's in my team. So I've kind of thought about that before rather than tinkering. So yeah, that's good. And obviously, I guess you do the same for like during the season as well.
During the season as well. Also, I guess it helps emotionally, right? I mean, if you're having 50, 60, 70 tinkers, at some point before game week one, you've literally considered all the players that there are there. So you're obviously going to feel bad when somebody or the other scores in game week one. So just be more decisive, read up about football more, and then tinker is what I'd say.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Like so many tweets will be, I considered that player for game week one. You probably considered every single FPL player there is, basically. All right, let's go on to number two. So I've just put have a strategy, but as always, there's much more to this, right?
Yeah. So what I think is I don't see a lot of managers having a holistic picture in terms of how they intend on attacking this season. A lot of the good managers do, and I feel like that's important because most of the players end up playing FPL as a game of selling the bad players and bringing the good guys. And what happens is more often than not, if you don't have some sort of filter or strategy in your head, you're going to get attracted to every shiny new toy that emerges every game week, right? Like for example, in my head, I pay a lot of attention to transfers and attack, and I make sure I don't spend a lot of transfers in defense. So what happens is that there will be 3 or 4 game weeks where your defense sort of underperforms, and there's a defender from another team who's doing really well. Now, I have a certain roadblock in my head that's kind of preconceived, where I'm going to say that I'm not going to spend too many transfers in my defense, because that's a plan, and that's a part of the strategy that I have. And so I'm not getting too attracted to that shiny toy in defense, despite them doing slightly bigger, because I know that there are more points to be won in attack or captaincy. So when you are looking to attack a season, look at how many big hitters there are, look at some sort of plan that you have in your head, and then make your transfers. Just don't do selling the guys who are not performing and buying the guys who are performing. Have some sort of strategy in your head.
Yeah, I think people get tunnel vision. I do as well. Like if I really think someone's bad, they have to go, and it's probably quite a poor thing. But you've also got, you have to adapt as well. So I guess at times, obviously, you're not going in saying you're never going to make a defensive transfer, but
Yeah.
most of the time there has to be a very, very good reason to do it, right? That's your kind of thing.
Exactly. And when we're talking about adapting, right now, I think I'm very far away from what my team is going to look like or what my wildcard strategy is, because we don't know whether Messi is going to enter the fray. Whether he's going to enter a thinking. And my thinking in terms of approaching the season is very different. Whether he Depending on whether he comes to Man City or not, because I feel like if he does come to Man City, then you don't really need to worry about captaincy too much. And then I'm thinking of going maybe big at the back, because you need to find the value guys, and there's not too much big hitter shifting that might be happening. But if Messi doesn't play for Man City, there are way too many big hitters that we have, and I'm going to sort of try sticking to the strategy I had last season, which served me well, which is kind of constantly shift the big hitters based on captaincy, so that you sort of capitalize on that. So it depends, right? And that's what I mean by adapt. I don't have a fixed notion in my head. I'm trying to see what the spectrum of options are, and then adapting to that while I sort of build a strategy in my head.
Yeah, I think you always talk about adapting and kind of being flexible, and yeah, I think it's really important too. I don't necessarily do it enough, but I do, and I kind of know it's important. You touched on Messi then. Obviously, if he comes in, the captaincy is going to be a bit ridiculous. But let's say he hasn't come to the league by game week 1. So you kind of point through is pay attention to captaincy, which sounds obvious. Obviously, captain's so important, but what do you specifically think people should be paying attention to every week?
Uh, I spoke about this on the Meet the Manager I did with you as well. Uh, Captaincy has the potential to be a 35 point uh, score every game week. More or less, your green or red arrow is defined by captaincy. Because we have so many big hitters and we have so many players double digiting, you need to focus your transfers and thinking on making sure that you have an ideal captain week on week. If you really calculate it, and some of the guys who've done well last season, the captaincy has been at 25% of their overall FPL score. We're thinking about it. If you to do well, I scored around 2,500 points last season to come into the top 100, and my captaincy points were around 600. So you're talking about 25 to 26% points based on that one single decision week on week. You need to think about maximizing that opportunity, and if you're making sort of defensive transfers, you have an okay captain that game week who might do well, and the upside there is maybe 10-12 points. But if you have a chance to jump on a really explosive captain for that week where the upside is 30-35 points, try focusing on that transfer rather than defensive transfer. Prioritize captaincy, plan ahead, think about captaincy all the time.
Yeah, so I know you've spoken before about wanting to change captaincy or change a player for captaincy. So obviously there was the time last year when you bought in Aguero for a few weeks, and obviously he did really well. Would you ever, outside of a double game week, so let's just say it's a single game week, so obviously most of the weeks are single game weeks, would you bring in a player just for 1 week captaincy, knowing that you'd want to get rid of him, or would it always have to be someone with at least 2 or 3 fixtures in a short space of time?
Even for a single game week, even if it's for a hit. If I feel like the upside is there, I'll do it even for a single week, even if it costs me a hit. I got 15 hits last season because they were a lot of transfers focused on captaincy.
Nice, and it obviously worked out. What was it? We should say 3 top 200. What was the rank last year? Was it 30, 23?
30th.
Oh yeah, so pretty damn good. This is the person you want to be listening to about captaincy and hits and stuff like that. All right, number 4 is very, very interesting, especially right now. Because Rate My Teams are everywhere. To be fair, we've put a few out on the channel and stuff. And I've kind of tied in Don't Be Afraid in this one as well. So why do you think Rate My Teams shouldn't be taken seriously?
I feel like whether it's on the Fantasy Football Scout pods or this kind of ties in with the point that I'm going to make next as well. So we see a lot of RMTs getting flooded around on Twitter as well as the boards now. And what happens is a lot of the managers tend uh, tend to end up taking these RMTs really seriously. But what I need to tell them is that nobody's really giving your own team as much thought as you are. Let's say I am looking at somebody's RMT and somebody asks me, why don't you rate my team? I'm gonna give it 15 seconds of thought, because I'm actually reading about the football, or there's so many things that are occupying my mind. So I'm not really gonna give you well thought out, considered advice. I don't know what a strategy is like, etc. Nobody knows this. And I feel like if you really want to have conversations with people on social media or Fantasy Football Scout, the kind of questions you need to be asking is, what do you think about how Leeds plays? Or do you think this certain player offers value? Or what are the tactics behind this team? Those are the sort of conversations that you need to be having with other FPL enthusiasts rather than just posting RMTs. I think it drives better conversation and leads to better decision making.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I actually put up rule number 5 while you were talking because that kind of ties in, like you said. So ask for opinions on players or teams or strategy rather than, should I make this transfer? I think just quickly going back to the rate my teams, I think I've been in this situation before and I've seen it plenty of times, is you'll ask a question about X player or Y player, someone will give you an answer, then they'd be like, oh yeah, but there's this situation or this scenario is going to happen, or because I do this, I'm going to make this transfer. And it's like you say, no one's thinking about that. No one's putting as much time for your team. They can't think of all those scenarios. They don't know how much selling value you've got in players and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't see any harm with asking for a rate my team, but like you said, the answers aren't necessarily going to be anywhere near as thought out as kind of
exactly.
you probably put into it.
And I feel like if you ask the right questions and you get a better understanding in terms of what the potential of a certain player is, you sort of have a filter within yourself whether to decide that player should be in your team or not. Try getting the right information instead of an RMT.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I kind of agree with that. And it is right. Anytime someone asks for an RMT, they're never going to get, never going to get as much time put into it, basically. Not as much time as they're putting in for their own one, like you said.
Exactly.
Number 6 then, right? So highlights and notes. You've mentioned match of the day. So let's say, this again is for more when the season has started, potentially. Maybe some pre-season matches as well. So what's your kind of strategy with dealing, with making your decisions ultimately?
Yeah, so everybody watches. So I rely a lot on the eye test, and I feel like if I ever make a decision, when it's very busy at work or whatever, and if I make a decision without actually watching the highlights, I tend to feel insecure or incomplete or whatever, because I feel like I haven't necessarily made the right decision. And that's why I encourage everybody to watch MOTD, watch the highlights, and pay attention to people who are in the box. In fact, so while MOTD is generally a 1 hour program, for me it's an entire 2 hour process. Because when I'm watching MOTD, what I do is I sit with the Fantasy Football Scout fixture ticker. I'm looking at the teams, then I'm looking at how they played, then I'm seeing if I'm interested in any of the players while looking at the fixture ticker, and sort of making notes and arriving to a decision in terms of FPL in that 2 hour period. I feel like it's the most focused 2 hour period I have in terms of FPL decision making. So, have a certain hour or two where you are actually, making mental notes in terms of players, deciding what moves you're making, and looking at the fixture ticker all at the same time. Yeah. I think that's a good habit, and it will serve managers well.
And I should say, I've not told late risers to talk about the members area, but obviously it is something that you do use a lot. And I like the season ticker as well. I think it's very handy being able to filter through that. And it's interesting because we had Simon on Thursday. We were talking more about statistics and stuff like that, and eye test, and he was saying something very similar. It's impossible for most people playing FPL to watch every single game. So being able to watch highlights and stuff like that, because I have picked players before without seeing them play in that particular week, but I don't like doing it. Even if the stats are good, I want to have seen that happen, even if it's like 2 or 3 minute highlights. So yeah, I like that one. I think this one is the most. This is the most interesting point, and it kind of goes on from what I said at the start. These aren't necessarily rules. These are things to think about, good habits, like you said. So don't have rules. Go on. Explain this one.
Yeah, I mean, I see so many players saying that, last season they didn't go for Anthony Marshall, who was my top scoring FPL player last season, because, he's injury prone. So don't buy Anthony Marshall because he's injury prone. Or don't buy Danny Ings because he's injury prone. Or never sell Mo Salah because he's essential. Or, people have so many rules when they're playing FPL. And what if Mo Salah hits a bad patch of form and Mane's outscored him by 4 goals in the last 6 game weeks? Are you still going to stick to that? Are you still going to have that rule? Like my you don't need to get very attached to your preconceived notions when you're making your FPL decisions. Keep an open mind. Don't be so emotionally attached, and just play the game for what the matches are showing you. So try not having rules and just adapt. That's all I keep saying. I keep hammering that point because people have these set rules in their head, and I feel like it doesn't serve anybody well.
Yeah, I think that it's the one that I always see is the lessons learned are always I took too many hits. My rule is now not to take any hits, or I didn't take any hits. I didn't do very well. Next year I'm going to take lots of hits. Whereas it should really be, is that hit worth it in every single situation from week to week?
Exactly.
Like you said, if you want to take a hit for a captaincy, but then next week you've got the perfect captaincy, you don't need to take a hit that week. And I think people put too much stress on this is how I'm going to play rather than waiting a few weeks and then seeing how the season's kind of taken them. So
and what actually happens is, let's say you have some sort of stupid rule in your head, and if you're watching something during a game, just because you have sort of a strict filter or a wall in your head, you're not actually seeing something that might let you think otherwise, because you have something in your head. So don't have these things in your head.
Here's a question for you. Do you have any players that you will never get in, or are you open-minded to anyone, even if they've, in inverted commas, trolled you before?
I never. Like last season, I owned Pulisic for 7 weeks. He blanked for 7 weeks. As soon as I saw his performance against Manchester City, and he played for the last 30 minutes, I got him in because he was on fire. He looked incredibly good. I know that he didn't perform back in the day, but we're in a different world right now. Form is a thing. Fixtures are a thing. Just because he doesn't perform when he didn't for you doesn't mean he's not going to do it again. Just don't have bias when you're making your decisions.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's a bit like I know Callum Wilson springs to mind. Everyone's always, I'm never getting him again. Well, if he comes back and he's at Newcastle, okay, might not be the first person on my list, but if he performs well and if Newcastle keep on, doing okay attacking, I would definitely consider him if the price is right. So I don't like writing players off, not completely.
It must have happened to so many managers with Sterling last season. He wasn't really good in the first half of the season, and then post restart he was a completely different player. So if you sort of had a preconceived notion there, you lost out on those points at the end of the season.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with this next. Well, I agree with most of these anyway, but this one is something which does my head in a little bit, which is ignoring myths, is what I've put on the screen. But they are basically balance and coverage are myths. So go on, talk to me about balance first and then coverage.
I mean, so many people want always a good-looking team, in the sense that they always want to have at least one or two good-looking defenders who are sort of premium. They want to have at least one or two good-looking midfielders who are premium, and at least one good premium striker. And in their head, they sort of have a comfort blanket because the team looks good and balanced. I really don't think balance is a thing. If you are thinking that midfielders offer more value than forwards, and if you're of that belief, and if you have 3 or 4 premium midfielders in your team, and if you have 3 cheap mid-price forwards in your team, and a team doesn't look balanced, it's okay, because you've arrived to the conclusion based on what you've seen, based on the data you've read, that this is the right play. Just because your team doesn't look too balanced, don't worry about it too much. I generally have try to always cramp in as many big hitters as I can in my team. So I'm always my let's say my 10th and 11th player are always on the lighter side, because I like cramming big hitters and I like having multiple captaincy options. So my team never really looks that balanced, and it's okay because you have a strategy in your head and you're playing as per that. And
Can I
Even
just
coverage. Yeah, go
before
on.
just quickly before we go on to coverage, right? I just want to ask you about balance a little bit more because I think obviously these words get used a lot, and not everyone is using them in the same way. So some people might say they want a balanced squad, so that like Joe, for example, always talking about price points. So he might call a squad balanced because he's got like a Werner who he can change into pretty much any other forward, a high price midfielder can change into anyone else, a Aubameyang down to Man City, down to Man United. And I'm talking from a game week one perspective mostly. And obviously if you've got a premium defender, again, they could be moved to anyone else. Do you kind of think like that, or do you just it's big hitters and then fill in the rest?
Yes, so I don't structure my squad like that. When I'm thinking about building my squad, I think about 4 or 5 or 6 players that I never want to move, and 5 of them are defenders. And everything else, if you have, let's say, an Aubameyang at 12 in your team, and if you have Mitrovic at 6 in your team, uh, a Werner isn't really that far away, despite the price point, because you can downgrade Oba to a 9 million, 8 million mid, and then you can upgrade Mitro to a Werner. So you can have the players you want in 2 moves if you sort of spend your money thinking about a strategy in your head rather than just having a balanced team.
Yeah, cool. And
I,
talk to me about coverage. One thing I will say is I do, and I'd like to get your opinion. I do think there are some merits to people saying they're covering defenses.
I
But
agree. I agree.
yeah, now obviously you'll always have certain players in those teams, especially if they're the same price. You're always going to go for the one that's more attacking. That makes sense. But there is
Yeah.
some merit to defensive coverage. What do you mean by coverage is a myth? Are you talking more from an attack point of view? Yeah.
Definitely from an attacking point of view. From a defensive point of view, you can say you're covering the Liverpool defense by owning. Even when you're talking about certain exceptional cases, you're talking about owning a Van Dijk over Trent because you need that 1 million in attack and you're covering the Liverpool defense. But Trent is a completely different sort of FPL player. So again, that coverage rule doesn't really apply there because you've got Trent in for his attacking points, right? So I understand if you have like a cheap bracket 4.5 or a 5 million defender to cover the defense of a certain team, that's fine. But it doesn't really apply even in the premium cases because we're only spending more money in defense because of the defender's attacking returns as well. So that's the exception when it comes to defense. And when it comes to attack also, I mean, if you're looking to cover Liverpool's attacking points, I mean, the biggest and the best example is you can't cover Liverpool's attacking points by having Firmino in your team. And even if you're having Firmino in your team and if you're comparing him to Salah, it's a wrong comparison. When you're comparing Salah, you need to compare him to another premium midfielder like Sterling or De Bruyne because all these three players have sort of the same points potential, and that's where the decision lies, uh, not in a Firmino versus Salah debate. And similarly, people are sort of looking to cover the Man United attack in Game Week 2 right now and thinking about whether they want to own a Bruno or a Martial. Again, you need to think about Martial as a 9 million asset, who the other comparable 9 million assets are, and you need to look at uh, Fernandes as a 10.5 million asset and whether he's better than the 8.5 million midfield options that we have, or does he offer more value than the 12 million premium midfielders that we have. That's the comparison you need to make. And what also happens is because people think about coverage so much, they're always so scared of double ups and triple ups in attack. I personally love double ups and triple ups in attack because, again, if I have Sterling and De Bruyne and I don't have a Salah in my team, it's because I think that Man City in the next 5-6 game weeks will score more goals than Liverpool, and I want a bigger chunk of that pie. And I'm not looking to cover Liverpool's assets when they're going through a bad patch or a bad run of fixtures. So again, you don't need to think about coverage. It's about comparing player A to player B who's in the same sort of position and price bracket.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like this it doesn't wind me up, but I see it a lot. Like I got involved in a conversation the other day about Ings and Adams, and like people, considering Adams is trying to cover Ings. And I just thought if like, I'm not saying we don't need to get into whether Ings and Adams are good picks, but if I'm looking at Che Adams, I'm looking at him because I've only got 6 million to spend, and I want to see is he good versus Mitrovic versus Ayew? Is he good versus even maybe going 4-4-2 and getting Doherty in instead? I'm not looking to get him because I think he can score the same points as Danny Ings. I'm fully aware that Ings is 2.5 million more for a very good reason. Of course, there's always a chance that a cheaper player will outscore the more expensive one. Whole point of FPL is trying to get those value players. But that's not like you said, it's not the comparison you should be making. If you're looking at Ings, you should be looking at Jimenez. etc. He's the
Exactly.
same price rather
Exactly.
than looking at Che Adams. So yeah, I'm fully with you on balance. A little bit with balance. I think it depends how you're looking at it. But coverage, for attackers in particular, and I fully agree. Like if suddenly Foden becomes nailed, and you've got Sterling, there's no debate about whether it should be one or the other. If Sterling's a good option for his price, and so is Foden, then they're both
Get
good
both.
options.
Exactly. And that's, even if you're thinking about something, right, you need to, the thought in your head should be that, is anybody capable of scoring 4 or 5 goals in a match as much as Manchester City is? And if that's the case, then double up, treble up on that attack. I always like doubling, trebling up on these premium attacks when a good run of fixtures opens up, because I don't believe in coverage.
Yeah, fair enough. So number 9, we're already down to number 9, which you've got play it like a football game, not a maths problem. What do you mean by that?
Just don't have fear of ownership. Don't make transfers based on ownership. Don't make decisions based on ownership. Don't worry about value too much. If certain fixtures open up, buy a player who's looking good, who has a good run of fixtures. Not because he's X% owned and you're trying to cover, and then people talk about swords and shields. It's not a maths problem. It's we sometimes overcomplicate this game. I feel like if most of the managers didn't have any access to ownership percentages, if they didn't really have access to whether they're going to lose or gain value on a player when they sell them, I feel like they'll have a better FPL score at the end of the season if they're playing as per what they're seeing in front of them or as per the stats. I feel like people play too much like a chess game, which it actually isn't. It's based on your ability to judge how a football match is shaping up. So play it on that. I feel like it's also the right thing to do. So yeah, that's a good FPL habit that people can. I feel like you'll end up having more fun doing this as well.
Yeah, I think it is difficult because it's very hard to not look at ownership, and even if you don't look at it, it's out there. You tend to have an idea of what ownerships are because people are always talking about them, and same with prices. Like you'll always see, should I get this player in? He's about to rise in price, and I do think sometimes that does dictate people's decisions. They might not be too sure about bringing that player, and so the price rise will be the kicker. I think it's a bit different if you've got the exact money, you're 100% sure you want that player, and if they go up in price, you won't be able to get them. I feel like that's a bit different. But if the only reason you're getting them in is because they're about to rise in price, that's probably not the best reason to do it, right?
Yeah, and even like I'll just give an example of from last season. Like around game week 32, I had a very difficult choice between Sterling and De Bruyne, and De Bruyne had sky high ownership at that point, and I was worried. Or if I was worried that De Bruyne has such a high ownership, should I just get him and cover? I mean, but the point, even if you're really thinking about ownership, the point is you need to beat the crowd. People forget that the point is to beat the crowd. And I know for a fact that Sterling's getting more shots in the box. He's getting more big chances. He's looking sharper. He's capable of goals, etc. And if you feel like during this patch he's a better option, pick him based on what you see, not based on ownership. I've made a few decisions not looking at ownership, and they've served me well. So I think it's just a habit that a few managers should develop.
Yeah, no, agree with that. Let's go on to the last one then. So when in doubt, back the odds. So is this like when you're literally you don't know what players to pick or what captaincy to make? What are you relying on?
Yeah, I always like having a look at what the odds are, because especially for 50-50 decisions in defense or 50-50 decisions in terms of a seventh or eighth attacker, when you're in attack, and I'm not really sure about who to pick, it's a good option to go with the odds, because these guys do hours and hours of endless research, and then they give you the numbers that they do. And even sometimes it helps validate my thinking in terms of captaincy. When the odds are in that particular player's favor. So I always like to look at the odds for those 50-50 decisions, whether in defense or the attack or sometimes even captaincy.
Yeah, fair. I guess there's always a full plan because you can't be. There's 38 weeks. You're not always gonna be decisive as maybe you are on every single week, and sometimes there are just close calls between defenses. Like you look at it on paper, and you're not 100% sure no matter what the numbers say. So yeah, fair enough. If you've got like a way to back up basically, a backup plan is always good.
Exactly.
To
have. Yeah. And this is so why I did this entire list of 10 is because these are sort of practices that I've implemented over the last 8-9 years of playing this game, and they've worked fairly well for me. So I just thought I'd list them down and help managers if I can.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. I mean, it definitely has helped you. Like I keep repeating, 3 top 200s, and I'm sure you're going to be hitting that kind of level again this year if you stick to this. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Yeah, fingers crossed for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this to the podcast?
No, I think that's done. I just like to plug that we just went live with the first episode of the FPL Wire, which is a podcast that my fellow pro pundit Zofar and Big Man Bakar are doing together. It's pinned on my tweet. If you guys can watch that as well, it'd be great.
Yeah, cool. I'll if you send me over a link, actually, I'll put it in the video description as well. So if anyone wants to check that out, go and listen to more thoughts from a top 200 player 3 times. Last time I mentioned it, then you can go and do that. And obviously the other guys are on there as well, which is great. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Let us know in the comments below what you think of these tips. What tips do you think we're missing as well, or habits? We'll call them habits. If you did enjoy it, by the way, make sure to give it a like. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll just say thanks once again for joining me.
Cheers, yes, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
See you all soon.